It started at UCL by Professor Thorobert, and Gertrude Keir was the first director, and the first person to be trained there was completed their training in 1947. And the requirements were very similar to what they are now, that people should have experience with children, not all, usually expected to be teaching, and they should have a good honours degree in psychology. The course led to a diploma in psychology of London University, and that had industrial and clinical and subsumed under those. And ours was professional education, psychology, education. And it was a one-year course, as was the clinical psychology at that time. I mean, the major change has been as a result of the doctoral training program. But I think, but the requirement of teaching has been diluted considerably, still accepted. But we realized there were other good people who could make a contribution. And we had no real evidence at that time that the people who'd done a lot of teaching, or people who've done the minimum teaching, and on a rare occasion, people who had done no teaching at all, but had worked with children, like speech therapists, that their proficiency as assessed by local authorities and staff within the university, and reports by practitioners in the field, they were not related to whether they had teaching or not. My first job, it started in 1954. I'd finished quite happily and successfully at UCL, professional training, and Devon had a job which intrigued me, whereby I was half my salary was going to be paid not by the education department, but by the children's department at that time, who had many problems with getting access to psychologists. There were only 2 in the county at that time within education, and I was the 3rd member. So I had half my week, if you like, spent with the children's department, direct access to all the staff there, who met probably a psychologist for probably the first time, had no idea what we were capable of. So it was a very interesting job for me, and hopefully of interest to them. And so I monitored children's progress and movements into fostering, into small family group homes, and also the courts were complaining that they required psychological reports much more promptly, and that sort of added to the basis for my appointment to the Children's Department. From my work with local authorities, I went to Bristol, and I was in charge of as a psychologist, the assessment procedures for a huge, well-staffed classifying centre which drew on children committed by the courts to approve schools. And they came from anywhere southwest of a line drawn from Southampton to Swansea or Pembroke. So they were a very mixed bag. I knew a lot of these children coming into this centre, where they were for 3 weeks or more, that there'd be a large local authority file somewhere which was not getting to the centre, to the classifying centre. So there's a huge amount of work that had been done over perhaps several years with the local authority services was not being fed into the system where we were to do primary assessment work and allocate children into appropriate approved schools. And the decided that could only be done if we could check out whether our reports are making sense to the receiving schools, whether, you know, it was coming up with results. But at that time, UCL were asking me to go back to UC and join a large, as the principal research psychologist, on a project on young offenders, 16 to 20-year-olds. It was well financed by the Home Office and the Ford Foundation. And UCL had tried to get me earlier, but I was committed to this move to Bristol and assessment. But I did decide I would choose going to UCL. So that's how I arrived back at UCL by invitation. It was a huge concern. I mean, we had 3 or 4 psychologists to do the interviewing, and I was one of them. We interviewed over 900 young offenders serving sentences 3 months to 3 years in penal institutions. And we followed them up through Criminal Records Office and had data, extraordinary, extensive data assessments, formal assessments, structured interviews, and we spent one day with each young offender spent one day with us. So it took us 2 or 3 years, 3 years to complete all the interviewing. And then we were processing the data at UCL. It was set up by Bert, quite clearly, at University College, and but he was not a director. He was the sponsoring, really, of the course. And Gertrude Keir, who had worked at Maudsley and I think in the clinical settings, I think, but had an interest in remedial reading. She was appointed as the first director of the course in 1946, thereabouts. And I was the second person on her behalf in helping run the course. But she was assisted by various members of the department and outside visitors in running the course. But I was one of the specification of my job was to make a contribution to the training on offer. That's got a long history for me because I think critical thinking and problem solving is so central to what I was concerned about within education. I think what we've tried to, and it's developed over the years really, is a very critical attitude to practical problems. Using all the knowledge that they can acquire and all the skills they can acquire. And I think, with the advances that have taken place in child development, particularly from the 1960s on, are very exciting and do relate to applied work and professional work. But it needs assimilating within the professional training course. I think our primary aim is really the critical approach to knowledge and not ignoring academic research if it has any remote relevance to professional practice. And that's a hard challenge to meet, really. But it's part of the course, and it's part of the critical thinking, it's part of the problem solving. And I mean, most problems in life are problem solving issues. And it's very important within education, which is an open system, to be as critical as you can, to be as precise as you can in an area which is a process. Education is a process and not a finite state. I think we should have tried to quantify much more what we want in terms of resources in order to do the very work that government expect us to contribute to, like the special needs. We are still under-recognised, and I mean that quite seriously, right through to the central government. I think they see us as still within rather narrowly assessment profiles in relation to special needs. Whereas I think we quite properly can assert we have a long, strenuous training dealing with and trained in acquiring skills for many of the educational problems that government identifies and has identified over decades. I would like to see more involvement and more recognition by central government. I mean, that when they say they're not involved in employing psychologists, they do appoint people who happen to be educational psychologists onto their staff. I would love to think there is a ferment of ideals by these people who are trained as educational psychologists within central government, spearheading what sort of educational psychology services do you want established, and what do we need in order to move that way? And we don't get that sort of pressure from central government. And I don't see why not. It's public money we're using, and we need some direction from the centre, because we need adequate resources to meet those needs. And these needs are really time-consuming for teachers, families, individual children, and it's going to cost money to get to grips with it. And I think we need to deal and ensure that we do establish psychological services which are of equitable standards across all regions in the country, so that rural children are not at a disadvantage, or children living in high density, low socioeconomic environments with all sorts of problems, health and otherwise. Without that, we don't have much impact and cannot expect much impact. And that's why the recognition by central government of the potential existing within the profession, which on any criterion does attract and still continues to attract able and highly motivated individuals.